Hello and welcome back to the Chintan Chats. Today we're going to talk about something all of us like to talk about and almost everyone has an opinion about, which is plastics. But we're not going to talk about the usual things about plastics. We're going to talk about the new things, technical things, legal things, global things, things that we don't talk about. And the reason we're going to be unusual is we have an unusual guest at the Chintan Chats, Swati Singh Sambyal. Swati Singh Sambyal is a circular economy expert. You might have read some of her writings. Apart from that, she works with Grid Arendal, which is a Norwegian company and specializes on plastics. So, thank you, Swati, for taking the time out for the Chintan Chats.
Thank you so much, Bharti, for having me over. My pleasure.
Great. So, there's a new report out that says India is the number one polluter as far as plastics go, and we actually generate more plastic waste than any of those countries out there in the world, including countries like the United States. So, what's your opinion? Is that right? Does it make sense?
Thanks for asking that question, Bharti. I mean, a very relevant one. The new report, which is written by Ed Cook and Costas Willis, of course, it's a very significant report from a data perspective. Of course, we know that countries in Global South are grappling with the issue of plastics, but it really puts data on your face. And what's interesting to see is that they have collaborated with a lot of agencies to source this data. So it's not just the University of Leeds, but several other agencies such as UN Habitat and a lot of other universities and research groups and organizations that have contributed to the data to this report, which in some sense looks into even on-ground inventorization. So coming back to your question, it does puts India at the spotlight in terms of being the biggest polluter when it comes to plastics. And I feel there are two angles to it. One, of course, is that if we look at the per capita generation, where countries are ranked in the report, we still are amongst the lowest waste generating countries. We rank 127th. So, which really means that our lifestyles and choices still make us, as individuals, people who don't emit a lot of, contribute towards a lot of plastic.
Absolutely.
Waste. But then when you total this up into the population of a country, it of course is showcasing us the fact that we are a significant contributor as a country. I also would want to highlight the fact that in some of my previous works that we did, and some of those works with my association with UN Habitat has been used in the study, we did found for a few cities that we did inventorization studies for in India, even if those cities claim themselves to be zero waste cities, it was found that what not goes into the treatment systems is either buried or being burned. It was a finding that just came out in our analysis and findings of those cities. It was either getting leaked out into the oceans or the drains, or it was being burnt, out of sight, out of mind. So in that sense, of course, the report validates the fact that what is not getting collected is either being burnt or buried or contaminating the soil and natural habitat. Other thing from a Global South perspective, which the report validates, is the contribution of informal sector. At least for India, we can say that there is thousands of tons of waste that they manage on a daily basis. And when we look at our generation figures, we don't add up the quantums of waste that is managed by the informal sector. So there is waste collection, that is what we claim as is our waste generation, but there is tens of thousands of waste that the informal actors manage on a daily basis, plus there is a fraction that is uncollected. So if we add that up, we may shoot up to 100 million tons per annum. I'm not claiming that. I haven't done an on-ground inventorization to claim that. But it is a fact that we don't, in terms of the data of cities, we don't add up what's managed by the informal actors.
Because they're totally invisibilized, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a great reason to actually be more inclusive of them, including in EPR.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that the report validates all those claims that have been made by several actors such as you, such as the work done by various civic society organizations in the country. And I feel we should take it in good spirit to do more evidence-based data analysis when it comes to waste management to inform effective planning and better decisions in terms of governance and policy.
Absolutely. And talking of better governance, we are at this point right in the thick of the global plastic negotiations. And before we talk about them, because they're so, they're one of the quick ones we're having. But before we talk about them, would you like to explain the architecture of the plastic negotiations?
Sure, I would love to. So there was a resolution passed by UNEA, which is United Nations Environment Assembly. This happened in 2022, post which there was a mandate for a global plastics treaty, and UNEP was the facilitator of the same. Post that, we've had 4 inks in Paris, Uruguay, starting with Uruguay, Paris, Nairobi, Ottawa, and the ultimate one in Busan.
South Korea.
Yes.
Yeah.
Most of these, the inks, as we term them, basically we have member states from different countries, civic society organizations, private sector lobbies from across the globe, what we call as the like-minded group. All different stakeholders participate, and of course it's the member states that play a crucial role in the negotiations for the finalization of the draft of the Global Plastics Treaty. Of course, post the ink in Ottawa, which was ink 4, there was a mandate for intersessional work, because it clearly came out that before the ultimate ink in Busan, there needs to be a lot of coordination with member states and finalization of the draft text to look at various aspects of the treaty that is being finalized. So there have been one intersessional work meeting that was held in Bangkok very recently, end of August. And now we are looking forward to all the outcomes, of it in the ultimate ink that is to be held in Busan towards the end of November.
Yeah, 25th November onwards for,
Yes.
I think, 6 days. But this treaty, it seems to have started with a bang, but it's moving with a whimper. In fact, it's doddering, because there's been very, very little agreement even on what should be mandatory, what should be voluntary. So generally, this treaty is looking like you might not even be able to conclude it in Busan in South Korea. Might have to have more inks or more meetings or more negotiations. But other than that, it also really looks like the treaty realistically is not going where it should. And we're still going to have a lot of plastic pollution. Now, what is your understanding of that?
That is a big fear, so to say, that it not remains just a downstream treaty that is just addressing recycling and reuse, because our countries have seen enough of it already. And we all know that only 9% of the plastic waste at the end of the day is getting recycled. So let's accept the fact that it is not a real-time solution. We really need to look at plastics across its life cycle, right from addressing production to manufacturing to waste generation. That is the last leg. But yes, there have been a lot of negotiations underway. I would also want to highlight one fact, Bharti, that when we talk about plastics, and when there are so many member states that are a part of it, we have to acknowledge the fact that not every country is in a similar situation. It would have been an ideal condition to formalize a treaty had all countries were at the same level. But that is not the case. We have countries that are doing significantly good work. We have countries that have the right heart and intent, but they don't have resources to even seek for alternatives. Or we have countries that have everything, but still wouldn't want to do anything about it. So there are all kinds of scenarios in place, and I'm sure this makes negotiations extremely difficult.
Can you kind of lay out what are the 2 biggest points of disagreement in this plastic treaty?
One, of course, is polymers. If you replace polymers, plastic polymers, I'm sure that'll break hearts of millions of stakeholders. I'm sorry for putting it right in your face, but that is the ultimate truth. But that is in some sense also the ideal solution. That why don't we seek for sustainable alternatives to plastic polymers that can biomimic plastics? I'm sure if the intent is right, that research can be undertaken. So that is foremost. Of course, there's a huge industrial lobby that is pushing it back, that does not want that to happen. But apart from the fact, the second issue is the fact that not every country is at the same level, which makes negotiations really difficult. And there's a lot of push and pull, to sort of converge in a direction where it addresses all the right things. So of course it's not easy. I mean, I can sit and talk about it, but for the ones who are drafting it, it's not an easy job to do with so many stakeholders, that are present.
Yeah, and it also looks like a very difficult one.
Yeah.
But realistically, what do you really expect to happen at the end, whether it's Busan or whether it's extended? What do you think is the most likely thing? Will we see a global treaty that is reducing plastics, or will it just be something that's very weak? What are you thinking about?
Honestly, only time will tell. But
Yeah.
of course, if you ask me personally, I would want a treaty that addresses plastics across its life cycle, that also is inclusive of all the stakeholders and actors and players that are a part of the plastics life cycle, which also includes informal actors.
Yeah, which they've kind of already said.
Which
Will
they
include
have.
them.
And thirdly, a treaty that not looks at plastics as an issue in isolation, but also looks at other impacts of plastics to climate change, to biodiversity. We were just discussing right before this chat that the humongous impacts that plastics have on biodiversity. So a treaty that is not looking at this critical issue in isolation, but also looks into addressing the triple planetary crisis that we all are facing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what really strikes me in all of this is that there is civil society. Whether you look at civil society in the south, or whether you look at civil society in the northern part of the world, they're all talking about removing toxicity, reducing plastics, biodiversity. Five Gyres was showing how camels, in the desert, in the Arabian desert, were so overcome with plastics. There's so much microplastic found in them.
Yeah.
And yet, all this evidence doesn't move the needle at all. And here we are, 2 years later, still trying to have this conversation about whether or not we should replace plastics. And that, it's pretty disappointing, isn't it?
It is.
We could just go on for 30 years, just like the climate, change negotiations. But then again, a lot of most plastics, in fact, come from, fossil fuels. So there's another kind of aspect to it, that you actually have to reduce fossil fuels to fight climate change. On the other hand, when you reduce them, then you won't have that layer of polymers. So in fact, without reducing plastics and without finding other ways or other materials and design and lifestyles even, you actually will have an unaddressed white elephant in the climate change space.
So true, Bharti. That's definitely is the case.
Yeah, so I want to just come back to India, from this global arena. There are a couple of things that, strike me, and that is that, we have really good EPR rules. We've banned, 19 different kinds of plastics. Some of them have gone away, some of them have not gone away, some of them have gone away in certain geographies within certain, more affluent marketplaces and so on. But overall, if you look at EPR, the question I always ask is, what do you do with low-value plastics? Because I see, and at Chintan, we see that it either goes to the waste-to-energy plants. Not everyone has a waste-to-energy plant. Other than that, not every waste-to-energy, in fact, most waste-to-energy plants, in fact, can be quite polluting. They're constantly fined for violating the norms. Then you can send them to cement kilns, and there are different problems. So I mean, how are we supposed to handle this?
The truth, nothing. It's unmanageable. It's high volume and absolutely a nonsensical material which you really can't do anything about. I would also like to add there are a lot of upcycling interventions around low value plastics, but in real time, they do pose a threat of leakages and contamination.
Eventually, they will.
Eventually, they
yeah.
So, of course, it's a big question mark that even when we say we are making bricks out of low value plastics, say mixing it with concrete and silica, or we're making those sheets out of low value plastics, it in some sense will contaminate or will leak out of the system. So, there's no real time solution. You can send only as much LVPs to co-processing. You can only burn them in an incineration plant or pyrolysis plant, but most of the cities don't have that kind of infrastructure in place. One solution that could be looked into is to have those regional hubs within states that could take care of low value plastics. These hubs could be a cement plant that could act, a co-processing unit that could act as a regional hub, or it could be a waste to energy incineration plant that would act. But I mean, the challenge is, can every city bear a cement plant, or every district bear a cement plant, or have a waste to energy plant? So I think when it comes to low value plastics, one could either look into the alternatives, and high time we look into alternatives because we've been talking about it since some time.
I'll just come in here because both these things are very problematic. I think co-processing and cement kilns, one of the things is that they themselves are very averse to being asked to use plastics as a fuel, because apart from everything else, they don't even get the plastics of the quality they want. And I'd love to hear more about that, as well as the fact that it's very expensive. We're burning fuels to take, fossil fuel derivatives to burn in a cement kiln. It's kind of like, it's irony.
Yeah.
So, can you kind of delve a little more into the technical challenges with these cement and co-processing plants?
I mean, the foremost being the quality of feed. When
what do they ideally want?
They ideally want dry feed which has high calorific value, because if you're replacing coal, which is a fuel that the cement plants use, with low value plastic, it needs to be a high quality feed which matches the parameters of calorific value that are needed to be fed into a co-processing plant.
So what's a high value plastic for them? Would it be a shampoo bottle cleaned or something?
Not really. I mean, ideally what should go there is your non-recyclable high calorific value waste, such as packaging, chips, wrappers and packets. That all is a part of a good feed that ideally a cement plant would want. But the challenge is that when these plants receive the feed, it is mostly contaminated, which means that at source, the segregation systems are not that robust, which means that this dry waste is also contaminated with wet waste, and thus it does not meet the parameters that are required.
Is this wet waste that's causing it, or is it also really dirty plastic waste?
Exactly. I mean, something which is mixed with, if you do not receive a segregated stream, it will be a contaminated stream with high moisture, which will not meet the calorific value parameters that ideally a cement plant would need. And many a times, this feed that is supplied by municipalities gets rejected. So I think that's why we are not that successful with co-processing, because our segregation on the ground is not extremely robust. It's not wet or dry. It's maybe partly wet, but it also like mixed dry waste, which is not an appropriate feed. Same is the case with such waste going to incineration plants. We all know that such plants receive mixed waste, not just non-recyclable, but also recyclable dry waste. So these are white elephants or silver bullet solutions, specifically waste to energy, which is not very practical in real time, because I feel in some sense we haven't really cracked the waste to energy code when it comes to incineration plants in India. We're not there yet. We don't have robust monitoring systems. We don't have robust segregation systems that typically a plant in Sweden or any other country, Germany, may have. And till we don't get to that level, I mean, we always struggle with the issues that we face with
But
such
they
plants.
also are so polluting. I mean, there's a good reason why so many countries actually send away their waste because it's, to another country to be handled because so much money goes into pollution control and then you still basically cannot handle the bottom ash because that is in any case contaminated. So what do you do? The whole thing is polluting.
It is. I mean, we wouldn't get too much into waste to energy, but a big issue is the bottom ash because of the contaminated feed that we receive,
Exactly, yeah.
which is almost 40 to 50% of what is being fed to the plant. And this ash is toxic.
Yeah.
It should ideally go to a hazardous treatment, storage, and disposal facility. But we know for cities like Delhi and others, it's just dumped in the open, and we have informal players then, sort of searching for
Metal, especially metal.
so it's just shocking, this entire ecosystem to manage waste.
So really, how do you even manage plastic waste? And it's perhaps we need incentives to put shared technologies. We were talking before this about biomedical facilities, and we were talking about how actually even those are overloaded.
Yeah.
So it looks like for low value plastic, we only seem to be using burn technologies. There's just no investment in anything else. Am I right?
Not, yes, to some extent, but of course, we do see that there's been a lot of push from the government in terms of also working on solutions towards LBPs, which means you look at packaging redesign or use of refill reuse systems that could lessen the load of
Finally, yeah. Finally, we're saying lessen the load, right? And India had a very robust system, which you now see basically in smaller towns and cities, really, of reuse. For example, you go to you go to a mithai wala, a sweet shop, and you would really get, even now for many sweet shops, it's actually just a simple cardboard box, and you pick up. Or a lot of old world bakeries, not the fancier ones. A lot of pansari grocery stores where they actually have these jute sacks, and they'll, take the scoop and weigh what you want. But a lot of that is getting pushed out because it's not able to make the money, and real estate pricing kind of pushes out owners of those stores to, sublet to fancier, better paying kinds of, tenants. So in many ways, I think we're losing even our memory of reuse and a different design aesthetics, so to say. Do you see success in this kind of thing? I'm only talking of the more morose part of it.
I mean, to add to what you mentioned, we are not really able to adopt reduction or minimization also for the fact because it's fancy to go to, a modern bazaar than to buy from a local store because you feel so posh and pricey. It's just easy to get your items in packaging there rather than going to a local store where you'll have to maybe carry a jhola or a few other bags to, sort of get whatever grocery items you need. So I think in today's time, which is driven by lifestyle and consumption, it's become a matter of convenience that is also pushing us towards more consumption and of course thereby leading to more generation of packaging. But I do agree with the fact that yes, in smaller towns, even if you go to rural towns of our country, you still see those age-old practices being adopted where you could take your burthen to a local grocery store and get a refill of whatever you want. Or, your old clothes that could be exchanged for utensils.
Yeah.
And our mothers would wait for that.
All the time.
All the time for that vehicle to
For
come.
those 2 katoris, steel katoris.
So I think it's there. And I feel in that sense that we are blessed as a country, because it's for us, it's only a matter of fact to revive or to give a twist to some of those age-old practices and maybe modernize them, or just pep them up a bit and get them back in action, because in real time they do exist in many corners and parts of the country. But I feel waste in some sense is also a problem of development, globalization, the metro cities, our class one cities, or our aspirations to have everything, at our disposal.
Which is also a model we've picked up as from a very northern space, right? Because as companies invest, they're kind of taking these kinds of aesthetics and practices to other countries.
Yes.
So, yeah. So, Swati, I know you have a young child, and, what do you think when your child kind of becomes 18? What do you think realistically? What world, as far as plastics go, what is possible?
Oh, I do fear for the world she is growing up in and will end up growing in. But of course, I feel I want to be positive and optimistic about it. And, as people who are working in this field, we do see a lot of passionate stakeholders that are there, that are working towards driving good policies, that are working towards effective infrastructure and, technology systems, of course, aided by AI and whatnot. And of course, I feel, I do end up meeting a lot of passionate young people around me. Not that I'm too old, but I do feel that the world would be a lot more hopeful and wanting to change by the time she grows up to 18. And I try to do my bit, of course, for myself, but so that she learns to do her bit, for herself. And I feel if every one of us thinks like that, we will end up living in a beautiful, sustainable world.
And I do hope all those dreams come true. And when she's 18, she won't even remember that there was all this plastic contamination. It would seem like a dream from the past, that all of us would be happy that it's over. And with that, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And most importantly, for all your ideas.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
My
Swati.
pleasure.